A warm welcome to this briefing on the Regulations 19 publication for Surrey Heath Borough Council's local plan. The Regulation 19 stage is also known as the pre-submission stage, and this is the last stage of the public engagement before submitting the final plan to the Planning Inspectorate for examination. This is a formal process that requires comments on the soundness and legal compliance of the plan. Next slide. The agenda today will focus on 5 key areas. We will outline the local plan process and progress to date, the key objectives and spatial strategy of the plan, the number of new homes being delivered, an overview of policies which the council are looking to adopt as part of the local plan, and finally, how can the general public make any representations as part of the Regulations 19 publication. So what is a local plan? A local plan sets out the vision for future development in the borough, providing policies and site allocations against which development proposals are assessed. Every area in England should have an update local plan, and this is reviewed every 5 years. You may ask, why does it matter? It provides certainty for communities and developers and the council, more able to resist development in the wrong location, focuses the council on delivery and access to more funding and attracts investment. It manages conflicts and benefits the whole area. Risk of no plan, inappropriate development, and government intervention as well. So in terms of the local plan, every policy is underpinned by an up-to-date evidence-based document. And some of the key studies include a local housing needs assessment, which is evidence-based, provides a clear understanding of housing needs in the borough. A new strategic land availability assessment determines the quantity and suitability of land potentially available for housing development. Employment land need and capacity studies. This provides and sets out where employment land supply, as well as an assessment of the likely demand in the future. Infrastructure delivery plan identifies the borough's infrastructure requirements, sets out what is needed, where it is needed, and when it is needed. And also a strategic highways assessment report to estimate the traffic impacts of potential developments which come forward in the future, and a sustainability appraisal, which appraises social, environmental, economic effects of a plan. So how is a plan prepared? The plan has commenced since 2019, where evidence was gathered and options were considered, and a consultation, as known as the Regulations 18 consultation, was undertaken, and comments were received, and these comments were reviewed. We are now at the Regulations 19 publication, which is the pre-submission document, which will be submitted to the Secretary of State. So in terms of a local development scheme, which is a timetable which sets out the time frame from submitting the plan to adoption. So in March of this year, we set out a new timetable for the local plan. We have undertaken various consultations as part of the local plan, and we are due to go out to publication on the pre-submission of the local plan from the 7th of August to the 20th of September. Once this has been completed, we'll gather all the information together, which will be submitted as part of the final document to the Secretary of State in winter 24-25, and then an inspector's report in autumn 2025 following the examination in public, and then hopefully the adoption the plan in autumn 2025. So as outlined before, we undertook a very comprehensive Regulations 18 consultation, and this involved various engagement processes. So we engaged through drop-in sessions in Camberley and Lightwater, where there was public attending these sessions, and there was a Q&A at these meetings. We carried out the consultation in Heath. There were also parish hall drop-in sessions, and hard copies of the Regulations 18 consultation document was made available at the council offices and also the local libraries as well. There was digital engagement, which took the form of a virtual local plan update, where there was a Q&A session. There was also virtual themed webinars, which basically went in depth into various topic areas as part of the local plan, and there was various Q&A sessions on this as well. There was also a virtual parish council briefing, which was undertaken by officers in the team. And also there was a opportunity to email via the consultation portal known as Inovum, where 1,300 stakeholders emailed the council. There was a bespoke consultation website which was set up, and also quick comments were available on this website. And also there was the council's social media campaign was undertaken as part of the digital campaign as well. So what was the outcome of this engagement? Over 300 people attended public exhibitions and drop-in events. Online local plan webinars received over 200 views. More than 1,200 views of the local plan website page were viewed by the general public. We received over 300 individual organisation statutory consultee responded in writing to consultation, setting out 860 comments, plus further site allocation consultations were received as well. So the outcome of the consultation were as follows. There was support for protecting the green belt and areas of biodiversity. There was general support for the need for housing, but more specific concerns about the level of development in villages and on some draft allocations. Developers were promoting alternative sites such as Fair Oaks. Support for regeneration of Camberley town centre. Many just wanted to see the redevelopment of London Roadblock as soon as possible. Objections to draft gypsy and travelling show people allocations, and support for the climate change mitigation and adaptation policies. Consultation statement published on the Surrey Heath website as well. I'm now going to pass over to Kate, who will take us through the Regulations 19 local plan publication.
Thank you, Gavin. So moving on to talk more now about the stage of the plan making process that we're at. This is what is referred to as the Regulation 19 local plan publication stage. The Regulation 19 local plan takes account of all the public and stakeholder engagement that we've had on the draft plan to date, and is ultimately the version of the plan that the council wants to submit to the Secretary of State for examination, and ultimately that it wants to adopt. Now, although we're seeking comments at the publication stage, the type of comments that we're seeking are somewhat different in character and content from those that we seek at Regulation 18. As Gavin has said, the Regulation 18 stage is an opportunity to shape the content of the plan, and we've received a broad range of comments through that stage of the plan making process that has ultimately shaped the development of our policies. At Regulation 19 stage, however, we've taken those broad comments into account, and now what we're seeking are more refined and focused representations, focusing only on whether the plan is considered to be legally compliant and whether the plan is sound, in line with the tests of soundness contained in the National Planning Policy Framework, and that's that the plan is positively prepared, justified, effective, and consistent with national policy. At publication stage, the plan and supporting evidence will be made available online, and the consultation documents, including the plan, will be deposited at council offices and at local libraries. Should you wish to make a representation on the Regulation 19 local plan, we'll have some further guidance on how to do so later on in this presentation. I hope that's really provided a useful overview of the current stage of plan making. So now I'll hand over to Jane, who will be discussing the key objectives and spatial strategy of the plan.
Thanks, Kate. So we're moving on to look at the content of the new Surrey Heath local plan, focusing first on the key objectives and spatial strategy. So to deliver a positive vision for the future of Surrey Heath, the new local plan sets out key objectives which provide a framework for the development of the detailed local plan policies. These key objectives align with the council's strategy and link to numerous council projects. The local plan key objectives are to deliver sustainable development that contributes to meeting housing needs, including providing for a mix of homes and affordable homes, to facilitate strong economic performance by safeguarding strategic and locally important employment sites, such as Yorktown Business Park, to enhance the vitality and viability of Camberley Town Centre by planning for a mix of uses, to ensure development is supported by necessary physical, social and green infrastructure, to ensure new development does not have a detrimental impact on our environmental assets, for example, by protecting the Thames Basin Heath Special Protection Area, to support action on climate change through mitigation and adaptation measures, and so to support delivery of the Council's Climate Change Action Plan, to promote healthy, sustainable and cohesive local communities through good design, and to support measures that prioritise active travel. These key objectives thus form the basis of the development of detailed local plan policies, as set out in the next slide. The spatial strategy policy sets the overall level and distribution of growth. The strategy is to focus new development within the settlement areas to the west of the borough to optimise delivery in the most sustainable and accessible areas. Overall, about 80% of new housing development is in the west of the borough. A significant element of the local plan strategy is to support high quality, high density development in Camberley Town Centre, together with about 1,200 homes at Mindenhurst, and the allocation of suitable and available sites in the countryside outside of the Greenbelt. In the rural east of the borough, the development of new homes is focused within the villages, which comprises about 12% of the supply, with the remaining 8% of supply from windfalls, which are unidentified sites. The government standard methodology for local housing needs sets a requirement for the delivery of about 321 homes per year, totalling just over 6,000 homes over the plan period. However, Surrey Heath is subject to significant environmental and planning constraints, including Greenbelt. Surrey Heath also forms part of an historic housing market area with the less constrained Hart District Council. Duty to cooperate discussions with Hart have confirmed their commitment, which is set out in their adopted local plan, to deliver 41 homes per year up to 2032. So a total of 533 homes to help address housing needs in Surrey Heath. This reduces Surrey Heath's local plan housing requirement figure, which is the minimum number of homes to be delivered in the borough, to 5,578 homes over the period 2019 to 2038. The sustainability appraisal undertaken for the pre-submission local plan assesses the likely effects of the spatial strategy to focus growth in the settlement areas to the west of the borough, and also assesses alternative growth strategy options. The overall aim is to minimise adverse effects and maximise positives. The strategy set out in the local plan scored best against the sustainability assessment criteria. The alternative growth strategy option involves release of land from the Greenbelt. The next slide sets out new homes in the borough. This sets out the sources of supply of new homes over the local plan period 2019 to 2038. This is detailed in a document called the Strategic Land Availability Assessment, which is available on the Surrey Heath Council website. A significant amount of the supply is from homes which have already been built since 2019. This comprises about 1,500 homes, which is 25% of the supply. Almost 2,000 homes have already been granted planning permission, which is 33% of the supply. This leaves a further 2,524 homes, which are on site set out in the Strategic Land Availability Assessment. This comprises 42% of the supply. Overall, this delivers a housing requirement with a buffer of 434 homes, which is almost 8%. A buffer helps to provide more certainty that the housing requirement will be met. The next slide sets out the spatial strategy approach of retaining existing employment land. It recognises that Surrey Heath forms part of a functional economic area with Hart District and Rushmore Borough Councils. It plans to meet employment land needs of the borough, principally by protecting and supporting employment uses within 16 allocated strategic and locally important employment areas. The spatial strategy policy sets out a hierarchy of centres comprising Camberley Town Centre, followed by the district centres of Bagshot and Frimley, local centres at Chobham, Frimley Green, Lightwater, Watchetts and Windlesham, and a series of neighbourhood parades. The policy encourages a range of uses consistent with the scale and function of the centres, and also specifically supports the regeneration of Camberley Town Centre. The strategy sets out continued protection of the Greenbelt with a few amendments to boundaries. One change is the removal of the Greenbelt wash from Chobham Village and delineation of a revised settlement boundary. This recognises that because the village does not contribute to the openness of the Greenbelt, it should be inset in line with other villages in the east and in accordance with national planning policy guidance. Land at Swift Lane comprises the existing Gypsy and Traveller site, and the proposed site extension is also to be removed from the Greenbelt. Finally, as Runnymede Council have already removed Longcross from the Greenbelt, the small area of adjacent land in Surrey Heath is also proposed to be removed from the Greenbelt. I'll now pass over to Kieran.
Thank you, Jane. The map on the screen shows geological constraints across the borough, most notably the Thames Basin Heath Special Protection Area and its 400-metre buffer zone that collectively cover 40% of the borough's area. And this is considered an absolute constraint to residential development. There's a number of other environmental constraints listed, and this map forms part of the council's proposals map. The next slide shows the Greenbelt and countryside located in the borough. So the Greenbelt is focused in the east of the borough around rural settlements such as Bisley. This covers approximately 43% of the map area. The map also shows the boundary of the Chobham settlement area, which has been inset from the Greenbelt. The map also indicates the location of countryside beyond the Greenbelt across the borough, as well as boundaries of settlement areas in the borough. Moving on to the next slide, we're now going to go through housing allocations by ward, and just note this excludes wards where there are no housing allocations. Before getting into the detail of individual sites, it's important to note that housing site allocations are split into three categories. Sites of 10 to 24 units that are allocated in the plan but do not have specific requirements. Sites of 25 or more units that have specific allocation criteria included in the plan. And finally, strategic sites that have a dedicated policy in the plan. Starting with the allocations in Bagshot, we have the Bagshot Depot and Archaeological Centre to the top of the picture, which is allocated to 50 units. There's land rear of 19 to 210 London Road, which is allocated for 20 units towards the bottom of the screen, and the Deans in Bridge Road, which is allocated to 20 units and is just outside the district centre of Bagshot. Moving on to the next slide, there is the site allocations for the Bisley and West End ward. This includes 317 to 319 Guildford Road for 17 units, which is just south of Bisley, and land east of Benner Lane, which is located in West End and is allocated for 16 units. We then go on to Frimley ward, which has one housing allocation at Sir William Siemens Square, and this is allocated for 170 units. We then have Frimley Green ward, which also has one allocation at land at Spencer Close and is allocated for 60 units. Moving on to Lightwater ward, there is one allocation again in this location, and that is at 103 to 109 Guildford Road, and that is allocated for 21 units. In terms of Mitchett and Deepcut ward, there is a strategic allocation for Mindenhurst, and this is under policy HA4 in the plan for 1,200 new homes. Approximately a quarter of this is now complete. There is also an allocation at land at Lowen, St Catherine's Road, for 60 extra care units. And adjacent to that, there's the Grange, St Catherine's Road, which is allocated for 17 units. There's also an allocation at land north of Guildford Road for 21 units, and an allocation at former Premier site Newfoundland Road, which is allocated for 13 units. And then towards the bottom of the screen, we have the allocation at land at Sherris Way in Mitchett for 16 units. In terms of the Old Dean ward, there is two allocations. The first is 61 to 63 London Road, which is allocated for 32 units in the care home use. The capacity here is reduced because care homes come at reduced capacity in terms of what we're allowed to count for housing development. In terms of the other site, it's Burwood House Hotel at 15 London Road, and this is allocated for a total of 10 units. In terms of St Michael's ward, we have Camberley Centre, which is towards the right of the screen, and this is for 35 units. There is also Yorktown Car Park, which is allocated for 27 units. We then have 280 Gordon Avenue, which is allocated for 15 units. 439 to 445 London Road, which is allocated for 15 units. And finally, for this ward, land rear of 1 to 47 Sullivan Road, which is allocated for 14 units. Moving on to the town ward, there are two strategic site allocations in Camberley Town Centre. That's namely policy HA2 London Road Block, which is allocated for 550 units, as well as policy HA3 Land Eastern Knoll Road, which is allocated for 340 units. We then have a number of other allocations in this ward, including Camberley Station, which is allocated for 150 units. St James's House, which is on Knoll Road and is allocated for 30 units. The former Portsbury School, which is allocated for 36 units. And Pinehurst at 141 Park Road, which is allocated for 32 net extra care units. Finally, the site allocations for Windlesham and Chobham ward include the Chobham Rugby Club, which is allocated for 91 units, a site at Broadford, Castlegrove Road, which is allocated for 15 units based on the existing built form of the site. And in terms of when the sites in Windlesham, we have St Margaret's Cottage in the Ferns, Woodlands Lane, which is allocated for 16 units, and land at Chamness, Woodlands Lane, which is allocated for 20 units. I'll now pass over to Kate, who's going to talk for Egyptian traveller provision.
Thanks, Kieran. So national planning policy expects councils to set out within their plans pitch targets for gypsies and travellers and plot targets for travelling show people that fulfil the planning definition set out in national planning policy for traveller sites. These targets should address the likely accommodation needs of travellers in their area. The council's overall identified needs for gypsies and travellers and travelling show people were set out in the council's Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment. This was prepared in 2020. However, in 2023, the planning definition was revised, and as a result of that change, whilst the overall level of need set out in the study remains the same, our need for gypsies and travellers meeting the planning definition has gone up slightly. As a result, the council has an identified need for 14 travelling show people plots and 35 gypsy and traveller pitches for those meeting the planning definition, in addition to 1 pitch for gypsies and travellers whose status is unknown and 29 pitches for those not considered to meet the planning definition. National planning policy for traveller sites indicates that councils should seek to allocate sufficient pitches for those that meet the planning definition. Now, across the plan-making process, the council has undertaken a significant portfolio of work to try and identify sites through which the council's identified needs can be met. This has included, but is not really limited to, undertaking a number of calls for sites, reviewing whether existing unauthorised sites are suitable for regularisation, engaging with the borough's major landowners, exploring the purchase of land, reviewing council-owned land, and engaging with other authorities under the duty to cooperate to see if they are able to assist us in meeting our needs at all. Any sites that we have identified through that process have subsequently been taken through an assessment to gain a better understanding of their potential. However, it has been challenging to identify sites for inclusion in the plan, owing principally to environmental and availability constraints. The work has culminated in the identification of 3 potential gypsy and traveller sites and 1 travelling show people site as potential site allocations at the Regulation 18 stage of the local plan process. However, following detailed feasibility work, it's subsequently been found that of these, only 1 site for a 5-pitch extension to the existing Swift Lane gypsy and traveller site in Bagshot is ultimately considered to be deliverable. And here we have a map showing the location of the site in question. As Jane has mentioned earlier, at present the site is located within the extent of the Greenbelt. However, the site is proposed to be removed from the Greenbelt through the Regulation 19 local plan in order to meet some of the council's identified needs. Obviously, however, a 5-pitch extension is only going to make a small dent in our overall needs, and a significant shortfall does remain. In view of this, the council acknowledges that it's currently unable to meet the accommodation needs of the borough's gypsy and traveller and travelling show people communities through an appropriate number of site allocations within the Regulation 19 plan. To try and address the shortfall, however, a number of policies have been updated in the Regulation 19 local plan to provide a more permissive approach that encourages unallocated gypsy and traveller sites to come forward to help address the need. This has included setting out in policy H9 that rural exception sites may be brought forward for gypsies and travellers, and that pitches and plots will be considered acceptable in principle within the countryside beyond the Greenbelt. We've also set out a detailed criterion-based policy at policy H11 to enable the assessment of sites coming forward outside of the plan-making process to be robustly assessed, and that policy also includes a requirement for traveller provision within housing sites of 100 homes or more. I will now pass back to Kieran, who I think will begin taking us through development management policies that we set out in the Regulation 19 local plan.
Thank you, Kate. So the next section provides a high-level overview of key policy areas in the plan, and the first policy area is climate change. The plan includes a suite of policies with an overarching policy SS3A for climate change mitigation and SS3B for adaptation. This includes the aims to support a pathway to net zero by 2050 and to build resilient and healthy communities. This is supported by a number of policies in the plan. including renewable energy policy E5, which supports renewable energy development and requires major development proposals to meet a minimum of 25% energy needs from on-site renewable. Electric vehicle requirements set out in policy IN2 with a focus on future-proofing below-ground infrastructure. Sustainable and low-carbon design set out in policy DH8, which adopts a fabric-first approach to reducing energy demands and requires development to demonstrate how sustainable construction practices will be maximised. Sustainable water policy DH4, which sets the maximum requirements for water efficiency and sets expectations for rainwater recycling. Flood risk policy E6, which sets out detailed requirements to ensure that development in the borough reduces flood risk and minimises the impact of flooding from all sources, as well as watercourses policy E7, which seeks to protect and enhance main rivers, their flow and water quality. Moving on to housing policies, we have a detailed affordable housing policy that requires delivery of 40% affordable housing in the borough, with the exception of fully flatted development in Camberley Town Centre, where there is a requirement for a reduced affordable housing need of 25% to reflect viability constraints. The policy also sets out the expected mix of affordable units in terms of tenure. There's also housing allocations, which I've detailed earlier in the presentation. A policy dedicated to rural exception sites, broadly reflecting national policy and clarifying requirements in the Surrey Heath context. Gypsy and traveller provision, which Kate has already set out. Specialist housing, which includes a focus on extra care provision and is informed by a local housing needs assessment 2024. And a range and mix of housing, including requirements for mix of tenure, type and number of bedrooms, as well as accessible and adaptable homes, self and custom build, and build to rent housing. Moving on to town centres, retail and economy policies. This includes policies allocating strategic and locally important employment sites across the borough to contribute towards meeting the future economic growth needs of the borough. Policy on economy, growth and investment, which sets out how sustainable growth and retention of businesses and inward investment in Surrey Heath will be supported. Rural economy policy, which recognises the positive contribution that businesses located within rural areas make to the rural economy of Surrey Heath. A suite of policies for Camberley Town Centre, which collectively supports development that maintains or enhances the vitality and viability of the town centre. Policies dedicated to protecting and enhancing the function of other centres, including the district centres of Frimley and Bagshot, as well as local centres and neighbour parades across the borough. And site-specific policies, including a policy for Old Dean focused on supporting continued neighbourhood improvements, and a policy for Yorktown Industrial Estate. In terms of infrastructure policies, we have transportation policy, which focuses on sustainable modes of transport and active travel. A policy setting out the requirement for digital and telecommunications. An infrastructure delivery policy, which identifies where new and improved infrastructure will be required to mitigate the impacts of new development and create sustainable developments and communities. This is supported by a detailed infrastructure delivery plan. Green infrastructure policy, which seeks to protect and enhance the borough's extensive network of green and blue infrastructure assets, as well as a policy that designates and protects green spaces across the borough, as well as policies that seek to protect existing community facilities and promote the provision of new multifunctional facilities. In terms of environment policies, there's a Thames Basin Heath policy, which broadly reflects the existing policy approach. A biodiversity policy dedicated to protection and enhancement of biodiversity and geodiversity. A detailed biodiversity net gain policy, which sets a 20% requirement in excess of the national 10% requirement. A policy including detailed requirements for pollution and contamination, setting out how development proposals should seek to protect and, where possible, improve upon the amenity of existing and future building occupants and the environment. A landscape policy, a landscape character policy informed by the Surrey Heath Landscape Character Assessment 2015. And I'll now pass over to Kate, who's going to go through the remaining policy areas.
Thanks, Kieran. At section 7 of the local plan, we set out a suite of policies relating to the Greenbelt and countryside. Policies GBC1 and GBC2 of the local plan are Greenbelt focused and set out guidance for extensions in addition to the reuse of buildings, the development of new and replacement buildings, development of previously developed land and infilling, with the policies offering a whole range of guidance that we haven't previously had as an authority, including indications of the percentage increases over existing or original development that might be considered appropriate, and setting out considerations as to how volume and floor space calculations should be undertaken. We also have policy GBC4, which seeks to protect the intrinsic character of the countryside beyond the Greenbelt by setting out the types of developments that are to be considered acceptable in that location. And that policy also sets an expectation for development to be sustainable and of a high quality of design. These policies are joined by GBC3 and GBC5, which relate to equestrian development and development at Gordon School, respectively. At section 8 of the plan, we have our design and heritage policies. Policy DH1 is our key design policy, and it sets out a collection of design principles which can be applied proportionately across all development proposals. Policy DH1 also provides some new guidance on backland development. The plan also sets out minimum density standards at policy DH2 in line with the expectations of national planning policy, in addition to space standards for new residential development at DH3. Policy DH5 sets out a robust approach to trees and landscaping that encourages the retention of trees and new sustainable landscaping that will enable trees and landscaping to survive into maturity. Section 8 also provides policies in respect to shopfronts and advertisements, in addition to heritage assets, which the policy approach ultimately is to set an expectation that any heritage assets should be protected and enhanced in line with their significance. I think that completes our overview of local plan policies. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Jane, who will take you through how to make a representation on the local plan, should you wish to do so.
Thanks, Kate. So earlier in this presentation, we explained how all the comments made at the earlier consultation stage of the local plan at Regulation 18 had been taken into account. At this stage, you can make comments on the local plan known as representations. We've produced a representations form for you to complete, and we've also published detailed guidance notes explaining how to make these representations. Both online and downloadable forms are available on the Surrey Heath Council website. We encourage you to use the online representation form, as we've made this as user-friendly to complete as possible. As mentioned earlier in this presentation, comments must focus on whether the pre-submission local plan is legally compliant and sound. The tests of soundness are set out in national planning policy and form the basis on which the local plan is assessed by the independent inspector at examination. The tests of soundness are whether the local plan is positively prepared, justified, effective, and consistent with national policy. All representations will be collated and submitted to an independent inspector for consideration as part of the local plan examination. The inspector will consider if changes are required to the local plan, called modifications, and will finally produce a report setting out whether the local plan is found to be legally compliant and sound. For more detailed information on the local plan process, please see the video links in the description. The pre-submission Surrey Heath local plan is published from the 7th of August to the 20th of September. Please ensure you submit your representations using the online or downloadable representations form before the publication period closes. A link to the Surrey Heath Council website publication page is provided in the description. Finally, thank you for listening to this webinar, and we hope you found the content useful.